Everybody, thank you all for joining us. If you notice, right, Dr. Halliday, Aria, she's like turned and looking like into the void, but it's not a void. We're at my house this time. The first time we've hosted Entrepreneurial Appetite in my home, and we had the opportunity to have some Black women who live here in San Antonio join us for dinner before we got started. I want to give a shout out to Jolene, who was our chef today. She cooked some authentic Jamaican food. Jolene is like my homeboy. Jolene is like my best friend in San Antonio's big sister, and I went over to their house last Thanksgiving, like the day after Thanksgiving, and she like made the best. It wasn't jerk chicken; it was like jerk turkey. I don't know how she did it, but that joint was bomb. So I thought it would be good to have her cook for the ladies who joined us today. And before we actually get started into the conversation, I want to tell you all who are new, those of you who have been with us for a while, a little bit about Entrepreneurial Appetite. So, Entrepreneurial Appetite is a series of events dedicated to building community, promoting intellectualism, and supporting Black businesses. And we started in 2018. There's a burger joint here in San Antonio called Mark's Outing. And Mark, good brother, posted on Facebook Live how his business was struggling and he wasn't getting customers. And so me and my homeboy Jason, who is Jolene, the chef's for tonight's brother, decided to host an event there. And we had the opportunity to gather like 25, 30, 35 Black professionals here in San Antonio for a conversation with a local state representative, Barbara Gervin Hawkins, about things that we can do to be more connected to community and thrive in this community here in San Antonio. And so COVID-19 happened. We transformed into a book club, and we had the opportunity to bring an audience now in person, but also those of you who are on Zoom to be part of these conversations. And so thank you all for joining us. Also want to make you all aware that today we partnered with Produce to the People, which is a local urban farm here in San Antonio, founded by my wife, Brandy Clark, whom I love dearly. And she helped me put on today's event at the house with the ladies here. And so my wife is a phenomenal urban farmer, and she's also getting into agri-tech. So we'll be talking more about that as Entrepreneurial Appetite evolves and we feature her in some of the conversations. And so she is our sponsor for today. Also want to make you all aware that those of you who joined via Zoom and the ladies who joined us for dinner today, that 10% of whatever we get goes to an endowment that I started at my alma mater, North Carolina Agricultural and Technical State University in HBCU. I started that with two of my friends who also graduated from A&T, and the endowment is called the From A&T to Ph.D. Endowed Scholarship, and it helps pay for graduate students in the College of Education at A&T further their education. So thank you all for your support. Our host for today, Brianna, she's like a de facto Aggie because she went to Bennett College and her husband's an Aggie. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. So just thank you all for joining us and supporting what we do here at Entrepreneurial Appetite. The last thing before we get into the conversation is I have another podcast called the African Americans in Sport Pod Class. And this is another thing that I started with two friends who this time went to the University of Texas. We all had the same mentor and TA'd or taught a class about African Americans in sport. And so during COVID-19, we saw an opportunity to take the materials from our class and make that accessible to the broader community. So you can also check out the African Americans in Sport Pod Class wherever you listen to podcasts. And also want to let you all know that Entrepreneurial Appetite is a podcast. So if you want to hear our previous conversations, our future conversations, you can check us out there. And again, thank you all for supporting us here today. And so without further ado, I want to take this opportunity to introduce you all to someone who I know as a phenomenal woman, someone who is she really knows me, right? And so we've had friendly, loving debates back and forth. I've been over her house. I've seen her kids. I know her husband. And when I was living here in San Antonio, and really like in a lot of ways by myself, my daddy was sick with cancer and things like that. She don't know this. Lord, I almost start crying. But like her family was like a real like strong part of my community here in San Antonio. And I remember the first time I met her, it was random. It was over there near Live Oak, which is outside by San Antonio, and like she was just sitting there talking with some friends, and I think she had her Bennett College shirt on and stuff. I was like, oh, you went to Bennett, blah blah blah. And I think that's how we figured out that she was married to Reese, who went to A&T, who was part of like my community of A&T Aggies who lived here in San Antonio. And so I've been to baby showers, I've been to like baby parties, ate her husband's Jamaican rum cake that didn't have the rum permeate all through the cake. It was like in certain spots. It was the first time trying it. Like, I really know her. Like, that's my real friend in real life. But she's phenomenal, even besides being my friend. She's like a presidential postdoctoral fellow in the Department of Communication at the University of Maryland. And as happy as I am to say that, I'm sad to say that because that means they had to move to Maryland. But I'm so happy for her success. She's doing big things. And it's interesting that her area of study is like an area of passion for me in terms of like podcasting and media. It's not something that I study as a scholar, but we have a common connection in terms of like thinking about podcasting and its impact in a way that it can interact with Black communities and Black culture. And so it's just a joy to have her here, be the person who is driving this conversation with Aria S. Halliday, who is, I believe, an assistant professor, but maybe an associate professor at the University of Kentucky. She is on like a super prestigious, I don't even know if I'm supposed to say it because it seemed like it's a secret society of fellows at UT Austin. She's on fellowship there. I think it's called the Harrington Fellowship. And so it is for scholars who are doing high impact work, who the University of Texas invites in just to do research. And so her book, By Black, has had such an impact that scholars in her community and even outside of her community have recognized her for that and have given her the opportunity to be a part of this prestigious fellowship. And so she studies the cultural construction of Black girlhood and womanhood in material, visual, and digital culture in the late 20th and early 21st centuries. And so I'm gonna fade into the background. I'm gonna pass the mic to Brianna as she's gonna drive the conversation. But I wanna invite all of you, those of you who are also on the Zoom, man, if you got a comment, you wanna type something in the chat, type it in the chat. If you got a question, raise your hand. And there will be time for Q&A afterwards, but if you all wanna join the conversation as Brianna and Ari are dialoguing with one another, feel free to do that. And so, again, thank you all for joining us, and I hope that you enjoy.
Hello, everyone. Can y'all hear me? Can you hear me? Yes. Okay. Langston, thank you for that introduction. I am so happy to be on this podcast. Just real quick, there's a connection between the two of you that I wanted to make sure to shout out and give both of y'all your flowers. As Langston says, we have been friends for years. Langston is like Mr. San Antonio, like everybody in San Antonio knows Langston. And I'm so honored to have known you in San Antonio and I still know you now. And it's been a pleasure to see how you've grown from when I first knew you till now. You were my friend throughout grad school, and so it's really great to be on the other side of grad school and to be in this space with you. Aria, we have never actually met in real life, quote unquote, but we have been in the same grad school space for several years until you transitioned into being the lovely professor you are today. And I remember when I saw you in that space, I was like, oh, you're going places. I need to keep my eye on you. I knew then, and obviously you are all that and a bag of chips and all of that. So I'm just so excited to talk to you about your book. But both of you all have just motivated me so much, like seriously, throughout my time as a PhD student, because I'm sure y'all both know how difficult it is to be a Black doctoral student. And then to do that while also being in the pandemic, it was just really hard. And there was lots of times where I was like, I'm not gonna make it. This is not gonna happen. This is a dream that is just not gonna happen. And seeing folks like you who not only have you done it, but you surpassed it and you still kept community at the center of your work, that has meant a lot to me as a young scholar. So I just wanted to make sure to give both of y'all your flowers. And so before we get started, Ari, I don't know if there's anything you wanted to add or if you wanted to just hop right in.
No, I just want to say thank you. I mean, at any point, I mean, you know, as an academic, at any point, someone's like, oh, I read your book, or I read something that you did, like that just feels really good, because I mean, in a lot of ways, especially as a Black scholar, as a Black woman scholar, we're like less than 1% of the people with PhDs, right? Mm-hmm. And so for somebody to say like, you know, I'm interested in what you're talking about, I think that's worth, you know, reading. I think it's worth putting a whole group of people together to say like, y'all should know about this thing. I mean, that just like, I mean, it does so much for my heart. And I think, you know, ultimately, as you said, like community is everything to me. And so this is dope just to be in a space. I'm so grateful for Langston to put this together, to be along with you and clearly all the dope people that he knows. So I'm just grateful. I just want to make sure that we put that, you know, on the forefront. Like, this is not by accident, this is intentional. It's because Langston has done the work to make sure we're connected. So thank you.
I also wanted to add really quickly that the fact that there's this space happening in San Antonio, a dinner party full of Black women at Langston's house, is absolutely amazing, because there was a lot of times when I lived in San Antonio where I was like, I would never be able to find a space like that. So I'm really grateful that y'all have that. I'm sad that I'm not there to witness it, but I'm glad that y'all have that space, and I hope y'all do it again. So I just want to jump right into it. I absolutely love this book. I cannot wait to talk to you more about it. I was like flipping the pages nonstop. Absolutely loved it. So the first question that I have for you is, how did you become interested in Black girlhood broadly, but also more specifically in Black Barbies? Because I ate all of that part about Black Barbies. I was like, yes, yes, yes. So I would love to hear you just say more about the beginning of your interest in that.
Yeah, in grad school, I was one of those people who was like, you know, people said like, these are the tracks that you should be on. And I was like, maybe something else. And, you know, I remember I had a Black woman advisor at the time, and I was saying, you know, she does, you know, Black women in literature. And I was like, that's really important. And that's really great. But there's this thing happening in pop culture that I think is also connected to what we see in literature. And she was like, girl, you ain't gonna get a job doing that. And I was like, but I might though. So, you know, I had to separate myself from her, right? You got to find the people who want to support you and do the work that you want to do. But for me, it was like, I remember growing up, and I talk about this in the preface and introduction. I remember growing up and having so many Black women, or Black women and girls in the spaces I was in, but like Barbie was not a conversation that we were having, right? Like, I don't remember, you know, I talk about sister friends in the beginning. Like, I don't remember going to sister friends and us having like a Barbie playtime. But the scholarship on girls, especially in the 1990s, says, you know, like, well, there, you know, Barbies completely changed, you know, childhood. And I was like, for who? Like, who are the people that, you know, are engaged in this? And, you know, the silent part is that they're white girls, right? They're not saying explicitly that, you know, they're talking about white girls and women, and how there's this post-feminist moment where white women and girls are feeling differently about the color pink and about femininity and all this other stuff. And I was like, okay, but Black women obviously were doing something in that space too. I want to know what our relationship to pop culture is. I want to know what our relationship to Barbies was, especially because, like I said, I didn't have any Barbies. I was not playing with them. Me and my sister, who I said earlier, she's in the chat here. Me and my sister were out playing in the yard. We were digging with stuff. We were making up, you know, pillow forts. We were doing all kind of other stuff. We didn't have Barbies. So I was like, well, what is the relationship between Black women and Barbies? Black girls and Barbies. And then as I started doing this research, I kept meeting more and more Black women who were like, oh yeah, I've been a collector since, you know, 1905, or you know, like people who have collections that their grandmothers gave them that they're really attached to. So I was like, okay, there's a disconnect, right? Like between the scholarship that's saying, you know, Black girls are not interested in Barbies, basically, and then the Black women who are collecting every single Black doll that comes out. And I'm like, there clearly is a connection here that needs to be had. And so I was really, really invested in like, where are Black women and Black girls being exposed to and connected to these conversations if we're not seeing it in the scholarship, because I know it's there.
I think that's so fascinating that you say that, because when I was younger, I was obsessed with Barbies, but I like my mom wasn't necessarily fixated on like me specifically having Black Barbies. Whereas I had friends who their moms were like, absolutely not. Like if anybody got them a white Barbie, like they were like, you can take that back to the store. But my mom was like, I don't really care. You can have whatever kind of Barbies. Like, it wasn't really that big of a deal. And so when I would go to my friends' houses that like they only had Black dolls, I was like, oh, am I supposed to only have Black dolls? So like that was like, that part was interesting. And now I have a daughter and she is into Barbies. And I never pushed it on her because I'm like, I'm gonna be feminist on, I'm gonna have her whatever she wants to play with. And she is gravitating towards Barbies. And I'm like, okay. And interestingly enough, she is gravitating more towards Black Barbies, but the Barbies that exist now are so totally different. And like, to go with like a lot of the points that you're making in the book, like they are geared towards like, we're going to be more realistic and we're more inclusive. And like, they have Barbies with hips now, and they have some that are shorter, and they have like a variety of Barbies that I don't remember from when I was younger. So I'm like, this is really interesting that, you know, I can have like a wider range of dolls to choose from for her. But I'm interested to see kind of like as she gets older, what that means for her, and like let her, you know, choose the Barbies. But yeah, I just remember that some of my friends, it was like a huge thing that it was like, you better not bring no white Barbies in this house. So I thought that that was really interesting, just to kind of know like where your interests began with
Yeah.
Black Barbies.
And I think too, doing the research, like so many people always talk about like Black people's orientation to dolls being the Clark doll test, right? So it's like
Yeah.
Brown v. Board of Education. There's this opportunity where people are talking about, you know, Black dolls or Black children's interpretation of dolls, right? Is something that tells something about our racial identity, how we feel about Blackness. We're making all these interpretations about what children think and believe because of something that they play with. And I was like, again, there has to be more context here, because you show up and you give a child a Black doll and a white doll, and you're like, okay, which one is the nice one? I mean, this is like random interpretation. A kid is gonna say whatever comes to mind. And so I was really interested in both how the doll tests, you know, communicate via Brown v. Board of Education that Black children have some inferiority complex, because that's really what it was about, but also that like dolls now are imbued with this information that like, you know, if you care about Black people, you give your child Black dolls, or if you care about racial integration, you give them Black and white dolls, or like it has all this information. And I'm just like, maybe kids are just playing, right? And so like, how are we as adults, right, imbuing information in these dolls, in children's play, especially Black girl play? And that's really what made me want to dig even deeper, because I'm like, well, we have this lineage from, you know, Brown v. Board of Education, but there's all these other ways that Black women and girls are in conversation and in connection with, you know, playthings that I think Black women are inherently, you know, we're working towards, right? As aunties, as mothers, as sisters, we're like, okay, I want to make sure that you have this thing that I didn't have, or I want to make sure you are in conversation with these things that I didn't have. And then you had like, you know, in 2009, Nicki Minaj shows up, and I'm like, well, she's okay, we can talk about we can talk about Nicki later, but I think we gotta save that piece. Right. When I was writing, she wasn't who she is now. Okay. So, but you know, she came out, and I remember being, you know, going to parties, and girls was like competing over who looked more like Nicki. Like it was like you had the pink hair and the wig, and I was like, I don't even like pink. So how are we so invested? I was really like interested. All of a sudden this woman pops up, because we've had Black women rappers, so why this one? But also like, why is the pink Barbie aesthetic something that like Black women, Black girls are like really attached to and want to aspire to, you know, with the wigs and all this other stuff? So it connected across multiple lanes for me.
So I am gonna put a pin on Nicki, because I do, like, we can definitely come back to her. But speaking about like dolls and like I guess you can call it merch, so this is kind of like just a little backstory. So when Black Panther came out, what was that, like 2018, the first one? There was like no Black Panther merch. Like it was very, very hard to find. And so my son turned 4 or 5 that same year, and wanted a Black Panther party. It was impossible to find merch. Like the only stuff I found was on Etsy, and I had to like do a combo of like buying stuff on Etsy and then making it myself. It was impossible to find. And even like around Halloween that same year, the Black Panther, of course, he wanted to be Black Panther. Black Panther stuff sold out. They had Black Panther costumes, Shuri, Dorothy, like all of it sold out immediately. And it was fascinating to me because for whatever reason, well, not for whatever reason, but Disney did not anticipate that there was going to be like that people were going to be interested in purchasing Black Panther merch.
Yeah.
Fast forward to now, Black Panther stuff is everywhere. Like there's Black Panther toys in the Happy Meal box. Like Black Panther is everywhere. But even in terms of like, for like when it came out, I definitely paid attention to the fact that there was like a severe lack of options related to Black Panther. And I'm like, this is interesting because this movie is this cultural phenomenon globally, but then we can't like buy merch for it is impossible. But then like thinking about that and reading your book, I'm like, dang, am I playing into something by wanting to see Black Panther toys and stuff? But it was, I promise you, I had so many moments where I was like, oh, I'm feeling like a bad feminist reading this book, like having all these like conflicted feelings about like, oh, do I really want my daughter to have Adore Mila Jada? Like, what does that mean about me? But it was just like all these different things. But so Black Panther is something that like I thought about while reading your book and like the response in terms of merch to Black Panther. And then The Little Mermaid, I thought about that while reading your book too, and like the responses, not even just like the people who are upset about Halle being cast as her, but then the little girls watching the videos and, you know, people sharing like, oh, you know, I'm going to show my baby the trailer and here's her sing it. And then also the adults being super excited, like, oh, I never thought I would see a Black mermaid in my lifetime. And there were so many people that asked me, like, are you going to show your daughter the video? And I was like, oh, do I need to? I guess I probably do need to show her because y'all are all showing her y'all's little girls' videos too. So I just wanted to kind of like bring up those two things and get your perspective if you have one on those two phenomena.
I mean, I think it's good to hear that you felt conflicted. I think part of my purpose in the book is to say like Black women's relationship with capitalism is much more nuanced than being like either we buy or we don't, right? Or either we're buy Black, whatever that means, or we don't, right? And I think like for me, I started to see those like in Target now, they have all these like placards of the Black women who are the founders of the companies who create whatever hair product. And it's like, is this supposed to encourage me to want to buy from them? Am I supposed to not want to buy, right? Like, what is the relationship? Because ultimately you're still paying Target.
Yeah. Yep.
Like, because the way that marketing works, right, is that like this is why the book is called Buy Black, right? Because ultimately you're buying all this stuff because you're like, I want to support these creators, I want to support these cultural producers, but ultimately like corporations don't work like that. So if you have it in Target, like Black History Month, for example, or Juneteenth, now that it's become Black History Month Part 2, right? That like, you know, they have all these shirts, they tell you the creator who made it, but like Target as a company has already purchased 100,000 pieces, right? Or if you want to say Black Panther or whatever it is, they've already purchased however many they're going to buy. And so if you as a consumer are like, okay, I want to support Black Panther, I want to support, you know, Black women doing this, right? You're only supporting it in this bubble of consumption that's being created for you by Target, right? In relationship with the creator. And so part of the book is really like pushing us to think about not only the Black creators who are, you know, changing the market. They've ultimately, like Black hair care is completely different now than it was when I had locks in 2015 or when like when I went natural for the first time in 20, like there's a completely different market, right? But so there's actively Black people who are sitting with Target, you know, corporations or sitting with Mattel, sitting with Disney saying, look, Black people are gonna buy this. And more so than Black people, everybody is gonna buy this just because Black women might buy it, right? And that relationship between the consumers who are talking to Mattel and Disney and Target and whatever, and the Black consumer who's like, oh yeah, I am gonna buy Carol's daughter because I know the Black woman who's, right? Those kind of connections is really the kind of nuance that I'm trying to push and pull on in the book, because like, yeah, we know it's fraught. Like we know like there isn't necessarily a way out of capitalism for us because of the system that we live in, but we also know that capitalism is not going to save us, right? So buying more Black stuff is not necessarily the answer, again, given what I've just said. And so I think the complicated feelings is right. Like that's exactly where you should be. That means I did my job.
Yes.
That means I did my job. Because I feel that way too, right? When I'm like, okay, okay, let me try this new hair product, and I'm like, why am I buying more hair products when I have a whole bunch of stuff under my sink I haven't tried, right? Like, I mean, because you're like, well, maybe this one might do a little, and then, right? Because that's all about our own ideas about representation. And that's why I would tell anybody, we were saying this earlier, like, I'm not a historian, but the more I was going into and thinking about, like, where did these ideas come from, the further I had to go back. And I was like, okay, well, okay, we in 1960, okay, we in 1935. All right, Marcus Garvey is arguing with somebody in 1910. And then, right, like, it goes back to the beginning, right? And it's not just, I would say my conversations are always, you know, on US based, because that's what I know, but it happened before that too. I mean, if you saw the Woman King, right, there's all these people who are having conversations like, okay, well, I want my nails to look this way. I want my, you know, all of that is a part of who we are as Black people, as Black women, especially. And, you know, the book is really trying to push us to think like, okay, if I'm going to consume, if I'm going to be a part of the market, how am I going to do that? And what really is my negotiation with all of these other factors?
Okay, so that does make me feel better about my conflicted feelings. So thank you for that, because I needed it. And so speaking of conflicted feelings, I wanted to hear you say a little bit about any conflicting feelings you had while writing the book in terms of representation, because representation is such a very fraught topic. And so on the one hand, I've heard people kind of say like, oh, but, you know, we've already written about it, like it's enough to say, but it's like, I feel like your book is an example of you having a very completely like nuanced perspective on representation and coming at it from a different lens, where it's like, yes, like you said, like these markets are changing and Black women are playing a direct role in that, but there's also still something else happening too within representation and like the kinds of representations that are being produced from these Black women. And so I wanted to know if you came up with, like, if there were any tensions that you experienced while writing about this personally, but also just like with the larger implications of the book.
I mean, I think the hardest thing for me is like, how do you write a book for and about Black women that they're gonna appreciate even as they're being pushed and pulled? Because, you know, we don't like being told about ourselves. So I'm like, okay, well, how am I gonna couch this? Not only because I'm a Black woman, I'm in these conversations. This is the kind of stuff I talk to my family about all the time. I have 2 sisters. This is what we do, but also like my friends, my line sisters, my homie, like this is what we talk about. And so for me, I was conflicted because it felt like I didn't want it to come across that like I'm bashing the ways that Black women have tried to change our culture. Right. So there are a lot of places in the book where I don't want to be super celebratory because there's problems with it. Right. But I also don't want to say like, this is trash, we need something else, because I think there's a lot of ways that people say, oh, we just need our own, you know, Black entertainment television. We just need our own. And I was like, well, there are issues with that too, because that, right. So like I closed the book talking about the movie Harriet, because this is an opportunity where you have a Black director, you got Black, you know, producers, you got, right. All of them are Black women who are in this conversation. And there are Black people who are still like, Ted the Aravo, is she the right kind of Black woman for this? I don't know about it. Right. And so for me, it's like, I wanted to, because I'm grappling with those things, I wanted us to collectively try to grapple with those same questions. I think that's really what my personal kind of concerns was. I was like, you know, is Black women gonna come for me? I don't know. We'll see. But I think professionally, it was really hard because some of these companies like don't want you to tell these stories either, right? I mean, some of the work that, you know, and, you know, don't tell Mattel, but I mean, I started to like harass people that work for Mattel, because I was like, no one wants to answer these questions. It's not in the archives. It's not like, where do you do the research to find out about the one Black woman they hired in 1978, right? Where do you find that information? Because as y'all know, we start working for a company, we leave, there's no trace of us, and that's the end of it. And it's like, okay, but Black women are actively changing their culture when they show up. Just showing up is already different. Right. And so for me, it was like, how do I do research and create a story and a narrative that I believe is there when Mattel and Disney and these other companies are like, there's nothing to talk about. And so I spend a couple of places in chapter 1 or 2. I can't remember now. Again, it's been a while. I think it's chapter 2 when I'm talking about Black Barbie. I spent some time talking about the company Shandana at a Watts in LA, because, you know, I come across this conversation between, you know, some of the founders of this Black doll company in LA after the Watts riots and Mattel, and they're like, oh yeah, Mattel, you know, gifted them $150,000. And I'm like, why would Mattel be gifting some Black people $150,000 when they're making dolls too? Like, they would be competitors. I don't know any capitalist market where you just give somebody a whole bunch of money with nothing attached to it, right? And so I really wanted to illustrate not only the ways that Black people haven't been invested in these conversations, but also how white companies have been invested through these relationships with Black communities too, right? And we think, okay, this is my come up, this is my opportunity to change things. But then this also, the companies are also invested because they're like, okay, we about to make some money. And this is going to provide the avenue for us to make these connections with Black communities to show that we're not, you know, white racist people. Yeah.
Okay, that was a word. Okay. So one of the things that I really appreciated about your book and the way that you wrote it is you're grappling with authenticity as it relates to Blackness, and like what's really Black, like capital B, like how do we determine like what's Black, like how does that change over time? And so I wanted to know if through writing this book, if your own understandings of Blackness and authenticity have shifted, if they stayed the same, like how has that relationship for you changed over time?
That's a really good question. I feel like I've gotten more sure about using Black as a everybody term. I use Black myself rather than African American, for example. So throughout the book, right, a question that one of the editors asked me is like whether you want to go back and forth between Black and African American. Do you want to identify? And I was like, everybody's Black. I was like, Black is the only word that we're using. I use Black exclusively, like it just is, because yes, we can talk about the nuance. Yes, my family is from the Caribbean. Yes, you know, there's all these, I grew up in North Carolina, right? There's all these other things that make ethnicity a thing, but like race itself is not real, right? And so Black works because it is this fictitious thing that we all identify with and are connected to, but we are actively creating it even as we're saying, no, that's not Black. Right? Or this is Black, right? We're actively creating these demarcations around this is what Black people do and this is not what Black people do. And as we know, in community, that changes every day, right? I mean, you can literally be like, well, Black people all of a sudden, I remember growing up, Black people all of a sudden were into, in Maryland and stuff, Maryland, DC, there are Black people were into like Hallie Hansen. Is that what's the jacket? Hallie Hansen.
Wait, what is it?
It's like jackets and stuff. It's like polo, it's winter gear. It's like polo and stuff like that. I started dating the dude. I had never heard, growing up in North Carolina, don't exist, right? You go to Maryland, DC, that's what everybody's wearing. I started dating a dude. He's like, oh, and I was like, Hallie Hansen don't sound nothing Black. Like that's, I don't know what you're talking about. Y'all make that up. Right. But this is exactly like the push and pull, I feel like, of like what Black community actually means. And for me in writing the book, I feel like it just solidified for me how fictitious this idea of Blackness is, but that we're so invested in the conversation that like someone saying something is Black or isn't Black, I mean, that could be fighting words, right? Growing up, the fact that I didn't drop G's, right, is a way of indicating that I'm Black or not Black or whatever it is. And so I think that it just made me probably more critical of the conversation that we have around Blackness. Like social media is always like, you know, Black people, Black, and I'm like, do we though? I don't know. You know, I feel like it's made me much more critical and maybe cynical about the possibilities that, you know, representation can do something for us. I think I've said more and more in conversations that like representation will not save us, right? And I think a couple years ago, I was like, oh no, yeah, like a Black president and a Black first lady. And, you know, we just need, you know, some Black people in the spaces. But like doing this research and seeing the conversations basically like cycle back and forth, right, over the past 150 years or so. I mean, it's arbitrary. And ultimately we have the same arguments, right? That like, you know, your allegiances, does class make you less Black, right? If you want to live on this particular side of town, does that make you less Black? If you decide that you don't want to be in community with this other type of Black people, does that mean you're less Black? I mean, I think it made me so much more cynical about the fact that representation can't save us because it is literally distilling everything that we are, all of our complexity down to this one little thing. And as much as I love Insecure, as much as I love all these other little, you know, these Black shows, I've been watching Crew, you know, The Crew, whatever. There are all these opportunities for Black people to say their very specific story. And if people identify with that, cool. But like, we got to allow people to say what their truth is and not do everything, because they can't do everything. Yeah. And I think it's just made me more sure about that. Like, if we know that Blackness is this really expansive and fabulous dynamic thing, then we need to allow our representation to be that too.
Said a word. Okay. Well, so I am gonna ask you to talk about, I think you said it perfectly. I think you said like distill something like really small. I'm gonna ask you to do that same thing and ask you what is / was your favorite thing about being a Black girl. Ooh. And I mean, that can be plural. It can be favorite things.
My favorite thing about, and I talk about this a little bit in the book, my favorite thing about being a Black girl was being in community with other Black girls. Like, I mean, just like, I think Black girls are just dope, like globally, right? I was in St. Kitts, which is in the British Virgin Islands last week. And there was a little Black girl playing with her brother, like a hand clapping game. They doing slide, but they were singing something else. And I was just like fascinated by the fact that it would be the same hand motions, but a different song entirely. Like, but like as a Black girl, I can hear and identify with that because I'm like, oh, I'm like, she doing it wrong, right? Like we do those things. And I think like that's my favorite part. Like, you go anywhere in the world and you want to play a hand clapping game with a Black girl, you may not know what they singing, right? But we know it. I think that's one of my favorite pieces. And then like Black girls are so creative. Like, we're always innovating. We're always thinking of, you know, I don't have X, so let me recreate with Y. Or, you know, I just think that was dope. And I think like being in community with sister friends, and, you know, shout out to Sister Rainbow and the other sisters who work with us in our group. You know, it's Black women who are like, you know, Black girls need some help. We need to make sure that they know who they are. We need to make sure that they're connected to community. We need to make sure that they, you know, understand HBCUs, because we're near North Carolina Central University in Durham, North Carolina. You know, they need to know that HBCUs is the place that they can go and feel connected. They need to know that, you know, dance and theater and plays are something that, you know, is dope and they should be a part of. They should know that singing is not the only thing that we know how to do. They can, I mean, we can play cricket if you want. Like, they did all those things. For me, I think it was just really formative because I was like, okay, yes, I grew up with, you know, my super Black mama and my super Black sisters, but being in a space where there's these other Black women who grew up in all these other places, and they're like, yeah, I'm also invested in making sure that like you just good on your own. It's something that I just love. I mean, I just deeply love, and I think, you know, it's made me who I am. So that's what I'm thinking my favorite thing about being a Black girl. And like Black girl hair is probably what, because we be doing it. So that's like one of my favorite things. Yes.
So going back to little Aria again, what do you think that little Aria would think about the book that you wrote?
Oh Lord. Well, since little Aria is me, I'd say that she would be proud. You know, I think I'm still in a phase where I don't really believe that this has happened. I'm gonna be real with y'all. Like, I'm like, there's a book that has my name on it and people are buying and reading it. Whoa. Like, this is no, like when they send, because they send you an email about like what you want your name to be listed as in the Library of Congress, right? So there's a library that will forever, ever, never, ever be that has my name in it. That's wild. As like a little Black girl who's like, I want to go to the library and read books. Like, that's, somebody could go to the Library of Congress and be like, oh yeah, boom. That's wild to me. And so I'm still just really appreciative that people are invested and want to have conversations about the book, that, you know, the book has been out for 6 months and I feel like it's just really hitting its stride in terms, people are like, oh, there's a book that is about us. Like, I'm down. And so I'm just excited. I think she would be proud. I'm proud. I'm proud
too. I told you, I was flipping and reading all the pages. What do you hope that people walk away from after reading this book?
I think I said this a little bit earlier, but I really hope that we allow just more nuance in the things that we consume. right? And I think that we already do that, but I think, you know, doing it with that critical eye, knowing that there isn't going to be something that feels the most authentic Black. It just doesn't exist, right? Because authenticity happens in your conversation with your homegirl, or like talking to your line sister, or like, you know, whatever. Like those are the places where like Blackness actually exists, not in this like fictitious representation that someone has created for us to consume. And so like, I think for a lot of people, for example, Insecure is really great because Insecure only tells one small story. Yeah. Right. It is not trying to tell all these other narratives. It's not trying to say like what Black Durham is or Black Chicago, or right. It's only Black LA and a very particular piece of Black LA. And I think if we appreciate and are connected to more and more narratives from Black creators who are trying to do that work, then, you know, we'll just love it more and we'll appreciate it. It will get the kind of, like Issa says, like I'm rooting. Thank you. I was like repping, rooting. I'm rooting for everybody Black, right? And in that sense, like, yeah, I want you to do whatever that dope thing is that you want to do. Let's figure out how to do it. Let's build together. Not because I think progress is a place that we can get to, but because like community is the thing that will, I mean, ultimately it helps us not die from white supremacy. So.
Ooh. Felt that one. I felt that way. Okay. And I'll kind of wrap it up with what is one thing or some things that you didn't get to put in the book that you wish you could, or that if given the chance to do like the second edition that you would add? Because I'm sure that a lot has changed since the book went through publishing.
Yeah, well, I mean, I might scrap that whole chapter about Nikki. Oh,
we didn't even bring up Nikki. I'm sorry. So yes, I kind of
we're gonna save it. They gonna
okay.
They're not gonna get me off the hook for that. We'll come. I don't know if I believe what I mean. This is part of being a scholar, right? I believed it to be true in 2015 and 2016. I think Nikki was doing some stuff that we were really tied to and connected to. Nikki now, well, I'm gonna just say patriarchy working on her. That's all I'm gonna say. Yeah, patriarchy working on her. But I'll say this. I'll say I didn't get to talk to Lavinia Black Perkins. She's the first Black woman who was hired by Mattel and started making the Black Barbie that comes out in 1980. I didn't get to talk to her.
Okay.
To me, that was like a piece of the story that I'm like, this is missing. We need, like, how do you write a story about a Black woman and not have her voice here, right? So that's something that I'm like, oh, like that would be a thing that I would want. I talk about Doris Connor and her daughters who worked for Shadana Toy Company, the Black company in Watts. Doris was sick at the time when I was supposed to be interviewing her, so I wasn't able to have a conversation with her the way I wanted to, although I talked to her daughter. Okay. Most of my stuff is like, I didn't get to do the full thing because of time, because of, you know, people's situations, because of pandemic. Right. So a lot of the stuff is like, you know, it could be richer because I had these conversations, or it could be more in depth if I was able to, you know, force Mattel to give me records of their relationship with Shandana, or, you know, like there's stuff like that I'm like, it could just be better. Yeah. But I think, you know, my life ain't over. I got more to write. So it stands on its own. I'm proud of it as is. Yeah.
I love that. I cannot wait to hear this conversation about Nikki, because I definitely, I was reading it like, I'm like, and granted, I was like, I know that, you know, things, you know, academia is slow. So I know that, you know, a lot happens in between when you write the book and when it comes out. That moment that you were writing about, though, makes complete sense. And I definitely understand exactly why you would write that chapter the way that you did. But I can't wait to hear what everybody else thinks about it, because I'm sure they have lots of colorful comments and colorful thoughts about Nikki. So I'm excited to hear that conversation, and I'm excited just to welcome everybody else into the space to chat with you too.
Yes. I'll say, as people are gathering questions and stuff, to the point about Nikki, I think that like I said, I stand by what I said in the moment, right? Nikki from 2009 to like 2017, like Nikki was on her own, right? She was doing a really particular thing that I think, gathered everybody in a way that we haven't seen before from Black women rappers and rap in general. I think Nikki allowed, the hype. Nikki allowed, if I can be crass, I don't, I ain't no church ladies here. I don't know. She allowed Dick to rule her life in ways that I think do a disservice to being a Black woman rapper, right? And so I think in a lot of ways she sold a lot of the stuff that she was doing from 2009 to 2016, 2017. She sold that for the American dream of being a housewife with a husband and all, like, she really wanted that. And I think she let go of a whole bunch of other stuff to get it. And I mean, you sell your soul to the devil, baby. I don't know if you get it back, and so I'm like, to a certain extent, she's a product of the environment of being in a space where it's all men and how that works on you to be a particular type of woman in those spaces. But she's also made decisions not to grow, right? Not to hear, not to attend to the ways that she's being violent and patriarchal and just nasty to a lot of the younger Black women who are coming up behind her. And I think it's really interesting because there's people like Missy Elliott who've been doing stuff for forever, right? But Missy was always in community. Right. With a whole lot of people. She was always bringing people with her. She was always putting people on. Like, her relationship with Lizzo, I think, is so interesting. And somebody else needs to write about it. Because she really is invested in bringing people with her, even if she's not doing exactly the thing that they're doing. Like, somebody tweeted yesterday, like, R&B is suffering because Missy is not executive producing albums anymore. And I was like, I mean, 702.
True.
Here. I see how we got there. So yeah, I mean, to my point earlier, like, community keeps us in check. And if you're not willing to be in community with people, or you only want to be in community with people who are going to be yes people, right? Who are going to only pat you on the back and not tell you when you're wrong, then like, you get Nikki. And I would say it's not an accident that Nikki, Drake, Lil Wayne, I mean, that is a very particular narrative about like Black masculinity and just like toxicity and patriarchy that, like, what else can you expect from being in that environment? Because I mean, Drake is trash too, if no one told you.
Agreed.
So that's what I'll say about that. Yeah. Questions? Let's go.
I have a question.
Yes.
Langston, can I ask a question?
Oh yeah, so let me get a rundown on the questions, and then we'll get into like how we'll make it happen. So those of you who are on Zoom, okay, you can type your question in the Q&A. Don't put it in the chat because I don't want to confuse it with just the conversations that are happening in the chat. But type your question in the chat, or if you're on Zoom and you want to be heard, raise your hand, and then I will come over and I will ask you to unmute, and then you can speak. Okay. I don't want no Zoom bombing, so if you start saying some crazy stuff, I'm gonna kick you off, so we don't have no wild stuff going on. I've never had that happen, but I always put that disclaimer out. So we also have ladies who are here live with us. So what Aria is gonna do is she'll kind of scan the room. If someone has a question, she'll repeat the question that's been asked so that everyone can hear it, and then we'll do this for about 15 minutes, and we'll have a closing out. So all of you are welcome to ask questions. As I said, if you're on Zoom, you can type it in the Q&A if you want us to read it off and then have your question asked. Or if you want to speak on a Zoom, hit the raise your hand function. I'll come over and I'll make it so that you can be unmuted and you can ask your questions. So I believe there's a question in the live audience, so go ahead.
Yeah. Hey. Hello, Michelle from San Antonio, not originally, but happy to be here now. And here representing the contingent from the Sister Circle, which all Black women who are here are invited to join and hang out with us on a regular basis. But I got to chapter 1 and 2, but I found chapter 1 just to be such a deep foundation for everything that you've shared so far. I'm looking forward to gleaning from the rest of the book. the concept that I found that you were exploring in chapter 1, this idea of Black women who start their own products and go on this journey of entrepreneurship. A lot of Black women want to support this Black woman-owned product, get excited about it, and then there's a calibration there between when that Black woman entrepreneur decides to go big and advance to the next level of the capitalistic journey, maybe get noticed and bought by a larger brand.
Yeah.
And then there's an interesting dynamic with some women saying, oh, that's not my thing anymore. It almost feels like what I interpreted, and I read a lot of books, and I'm always, particularly with when Black women authors, when they write books, I'm curious about which gaze that they are writing toward, right? And there's some books, controversially, for example, I will say, and we can talk about this later, Becoming, I thought was written for the white gaze. And that was really appreciating and wanting to support that story, but really not feeling necessarily like the audience that tour and that story was speaking to.
Yeah.
But also seeing a lot of women wanting to embrace for the sake of support.
Yeah.
Also, there were parts of the story that we identified with.
Yeah.
So then more recently, kind of more contemporary, Beyonce and Jay-Z doing the Tiffany campaign, right? And the questions that's brought up about, oh, you guys are actually embracing something that has created real damage to African nations and African people, and really wanting them to be like, no, we're going to take a stance, walk away. And then, of course, they're like, donations to HBCU, right? Like, it's like this again. And actually more complicated more recently, Lupita Nyong'o, who's Kenyan like me, very interesting diaspora dynamic there. Going to do a De Beers, which is another, like, historically a very oppressive brand that has killed many, many Black people in Africa, and the reason for many, many conflicts continuously. And many of the people who benefit from this is the De Beers family that's incredibly racist, blah, blah, blah. And so you see these very interesting interactions similar to what you're talking about, where, portions of the Black community, and now we can expand that globally, start feeling really conflicted about your faves becoming trash, or just kind of making decisions that may advance them personally, and then their own narratives about what it means for them as Black people to have a seat at the table, however small, in these large brands that historically have never really showed care or concern or centered Black people. And this new narrative around ownership, and I'm making it ours now. And I'm curious how you see some of the themes that you were exploring in your first chapter around the ownership of products, and then the interaction with larger, more broad, mainstream, white-owned, or even damaging brands historically to Black people, and maybe complicating this conversation about Tiffany with the Carters and De Beers more recently with Lupita Nyong'o. And when people are Black people are kind of like, oh, they're not doing it for us anymore. So now I'm not down with it. Or is this other counter narrative even also true about, well, do we have a responsibility to try and create ownership in spaces that were damaging to us, but now we can create a new narrative to it, or is it all trash?
So I'm gonna try so I'm gonna give y'all the shorter version, perhaps, which is really about how we understand, or how I as an author might understand the relationship between Black women or Black cultural producers in general. And then, once they become connected to, in partnership with, bought by larger white corporations, both that maybe, have a history of ignoring Black communities altogether, or are intentionally damaging and hurtful to Black communities, globally. And so we talked the Carters and the Tiffany campaign was mentioned, Lupita Nyong'o and the De Beers diamond situation was mentioned, but also I talk about Carol's daughters and Shea Moisture in the book. I would say that I tell people, my friends, right? I'll say this. I tell my friends, all of us are trash. Like, all of us. Well, no, like, not trash tendencies, but all of us are trash, right? Like, you are the villain in somebody's story. You know what I mean? And so in all of the ways that we might hold these celebrities and the particular context that they are being situated in to a higher standard, we also have to lay them next to the same standards that we're holding of us and our friends, right? So it's like, I got a homegirl who loves Kate Spade. Has Kate Spade ever done anything for Black? Has she mentioned Black people before? I don't think so, right? But my homegirl is like, I want a Kate Spade bag and a bangle and and I'm like, well, go off, right? Like as much as I'm like, okay, right? I think the thing that I've struggled with, you know, during the pandemic and all of the more recent commitments to Black communities that have come out is that, you know, again, we are all complicit in different ways, but we are all complicit, right? Like, you know, like, where'd you get your glasses from? How are your shoes made? Where you know what I'm saying? Like, all of us are complicit, and that's literally the work of capitalism, right? And so as much as I might want to say, like, clearly I'm not down with Lupita deciding she wants to run around with De Beers, that's foolishness. Or, you know, Beyonce and her blonde glory deciding that she wants to do campaigns for Tiffany. Okay, sis, right? Like, go off. But in all of the ways that I want to say, like, you're problematic for these things, like, I'm also problematic, right? And so for me, I feel like I'm not going to hold anybody. This is like, I mean, this is again my thing. I'll be like, everybody's trash, right? In all the ways that I'm like, I love Black women. I want to be in community with Black women. I'm sure there's a Black woman in my life who is like, Aria is the worst thing. No, for real. Who's like, you know, she did me dirty because I thought I was doing something in our collective best interest and they felt slighted by it. Or I don't really mess with Aria because in college she did blah, blah, blah. Or right, like, all of us are allowed growth. And we never get to foreclose that opportunity for anybody. I think one thing that I've seen for Beyonce, maybe less Jay-Z, and we can talk about that later, but is that she's listening, right? In the same way that, you know, Lizzo is willing to change lyrics to a song she just dropped yesterday because someone said there's a problem, right? I think I have issue with like somebody like Lupita when she's hearing people say this is a problem, and she's like, no, it's not, and goes on about her business, right? I got problems with that because I'm like, you're not even willing to learn. Right? You're not willing to listen. You're not willing to engage the community that you say you care about. I'm more concerned with that, I think, than people who are like, oh, I thought I was doing something for us and I'm realizing that I'm not. Or I thought I was doing something that is opening doors for us or creating, right? Whatever, because we all are doing that, right? Like, I work at an institution that is predominantly white, who has done racist things to Black people historically. I continue to work there because I got bills to pay. But also, I hope that my presence in conversations saying like, yes, we need to name white supremacy. Yes, we need to name patriarchy. Yes, we need to name, you know, all the isms that might show up because this is the way that you show up. And giving students the language to have that conversation at the same time as I'm sitting in my office like, damn, I don't want to work here no more. Right? Like, I mean, like, we all do that. And I think like, we have to allow humanity for Black people as much as we allow humanity for anybody else. I think my concern with us generally is that we hold Black people to the standard that nobody else has. I was like, white people can literally be trash every day. They trash every day, and you know they trash it. Everybody knows they trash, and they wake up and they're like, you know what? Like, matter of fact, thinking of a trash white man, Jeff Bezos said yesterday, you know what? I'm about to give away my fortune and help the less fortunate. Sir, what? Don't play games with us. But also his wife, or his ex-wife, I should say, is out here giving billions of dollars, right, to HBCUs I'm waiting on her announcement because it's every December. Y'all know it's every December. She's like, okay, I found 50 new institutions I'm gonna give to some, right? And I'm like, does it make her any less problematic because she's giving it away? Because every time she gives it away, she still has more, right? She like is inherently rich. Like, there isn't a way that she could give it all away. So Jeff Bezos having some moment where he decides, I don't want to be trash anymore. Don't trash me on the internet, you guys. I'm like, you still trash. You still trash. And so I don't know. I think I think I've been working on me to be like, I can't hold myself to a standard where I'm always perfect politically and otherwise. And I don't allow that same space to figure, and I know I fail, right? And I don't allow that same space for other people. So I'm not saying don't tell Lupita she's trash. And I'm not saying don't, cancel the Carters or whatever. I'm not saying that, but I'm saying we have to allow the nuance as much as we're like, this is a problem. Right. Because if you would allow your homegirl to do it, you got to allow the celebrities who are even less in community with us, right, to have that space. That's what I would say. Yeah. Oh, someone was like, can you please share details about the Lupita matter? So I'm going to be quick and just say that you can Google it if you really want more. But basically, she decided to have a partnership with De Beers, a company that's known for diamond mines in many countries in mostly Southern Africa, if I remember correctly. And they are, if you ever watch the movie Blood Diamond, like literally it's based on De Beers mines, right? So her relationship with them, she's saying, I'm creating opportunity for African people, for African women to start these micro businesses and blah, blah, blah. But how are you doing that with a company that literally is cutting off arms of people in your community? That's basically the shorthand. There's another question here. If there aren't any, Brianna, do you see any others floating around? Okay, cool. Go ahead.
So it's more of a comment.
Sure.
We're not talking about healthy competition. So I think in terms of Nicki Minaj, right, healthy competition was Cardi B, right? And so her kind of falling off afforded Cardi B the room to become the Cardi B that she is today. And the same thing with the Beyoncés and the Carters, them moving forward. One, we don't, as Black people or people of color or African Americans, worldwide, part of the diaspora, we don't have the De Beers, we don't have the Tiffany's. So what do they expand to, right? Where does someone who's making $2.6 billion a year go to for the next partnership for a Black person? But what they did by doing that is now created the room for, say, I'm just gonna make up a name, Tamika's Jewelry, right? And now Tamika's Jewelry can have a Meg Stallion come and show off her jewelry, and now it has the ability to compete on the levels that Carters can create, right?
Yeah.
So I think there's an optimistic way of looking at it, right? We are all trash, I get that conversation, but I think the juxtaposition to that is that there's an openness for healthy competition, right?
Yeah.
And I think even in the book, looking at Barbie and then looking at all the subsidiaries that come outside of Barbie, again, healthy competition. If it were not for that Barbie aspect, where would the African Black doll fit in, right?
Yeah.
So I don't know. I think we should enlighten ourselves in that as well, right? We should look at that as well.
Yeah. So there was a comment here just about, healthy competition and the fact that having the first or having an opportunity to have those partnerships, creates more opportunities later. And I don't disagree with you at all. I think my comment would be that yes, this is part of the point of how capitalism makes all of us complicit regardless, right? Because you're yes, we want a Black president because we ain't never had one and we still got to know all the names of the presidents, and now some little children got to know Barack Obama, right? But at the same time, Barack Obama is dropping bombs in Palestine, right? So in all of the ways that we might be yes, Barack, Michelle, the children, all that, right? We also got to be I think someone said earlier that Michelle Obama's becoming, and she has a new book coming out soon. Who is the audience? Who is that for? But the Obamas having to deal with Netflix. Yes, it does open opportunity for more people to have relationships with Netflix and say hey, there's a market for the stuff that Black people want to watch that just is about Black people. I don't know, but perhaps in some genre of the brain, the Obamas having a relationship and having so much love for becoming. She was selling out Madison Square Garden. That is
After the rock star.
I mean, she went from first lady to full blown global rock star in like 2 seconds. It creates opportunity for people like Viola Davis to now be nominated for a Grammy for Finding Me. Tabitha Brown's show and subsequent other things. I mean, she had a clothing line. I got some pants. Okay. I got a pant. I got 2 dresses. Like, look, I'm right. It creates the opportunity. So I agree with you, but I think this is part of kind of the nuance and the struggle that I'm asking us to have in the book. Like, yes, these things are dope because it's the first and you get to have it on your shelf and say, like, right now I'm writing a piece about the new Black Barbie, the new Black collectibles that Barbie is creating that are Maya Angelou and Ida B. Wells. And I'm just like, don't touch Ida B. Wells. Like, don't do that to Ida B. Wells. You have made her a figurine. Like, I am what? Like, I'm like, how can we possibly? But also I'm in groups with Black people, mostly Black people, but Black doll collectors who are like, I am so glad that I get to have this thing that now reminds me of the real thing. But I'm like, but y'all could just read the books and y'all could just read the speeches and you could just listen to the voice. And you like, do we need a Martin Luther King doll or do we just need to read what he said? Like, you know, so part of me is like, yes, we need the things, but also, do we? Thank you.
I just follow up with one question.
Go off.
Can you give us your ideals of consumerism? Because I think that is the basis where you're expanding from.
My ideals of consumerism. So I explain it to my students in this way that, you know, ultimately we wake up every day a naked person. You were born a baby, right? You didn't have affinity for anything. You weren't attached to anything. You didn't have a particular idea of what you wanted to look like, how you wanted to feel. As you grew up, as you engaged with other people, you created an idea of how to do the look or the feel that you wanted to have every day. So that means you buy a certain thing that matches that aesthetic. And I also say, like, you know, I say everybody is trash, but also everybody is performing, right? And so when we show up in any given space, we are actively creating a narrative about ourselves that when I leave here in 30 minutes, this is not what I look like, right? So I think there's a lot of ways that we are constantly consuming and navigating that relationship to consumption all of the time. And even day to day, hour to hour, minute to minute, that navigation and relationship changes. I think that addresses your question a bit. The question was about, you know, my ideas about consumerism.
And you also think of social media plays into that too.
Oh, yes. Well, now that social media is a thing that, like, you know, there are such a thing as an influencer, right? Yes. When we were kids, you couldn't get a job as an influencer, right? But now there are people, their literal job, their family, not only like them, but their husband, their kids, the whole family dynamic is to influence people to buy things. That has completely changed the way that we think about consumption too, because we want it to be real. Yeah, it's a couple questions over here. You can't cut us off yet. Okay, thank you.
I had just a question about this conversation of gaze and perspective.
Yeah.
So, as someone who grew up where there were a couple of Black Barbies, but white friend, I grew up in Minnesota. My white friends didn't have them, right? So they would make me play Ken when we were over there because I didn't look like Barbie. So I wasn't really into Barbies, but I was into American Girl doll.
Okay.
And I remember when Addie came out, and I was just so disappointed. Yeah. And you know, I used to get the catalogs. The catalogs would come every quarter, those long, big ones, and I would circle everything that I wanted and then give it to my mother and be like, girl, it's expensive. You're not getting
none of these things.
But I remember when the Addie doll came out and I showed it to her and she said, okay. And these dolls were like $84 and like $19.97. So a lot. And she was like, all right, do you want Addie? You can have Addie. Samantha, the ones that have like a cool factor, right? And so to this point of perspective and gaze, even influencer, thinking about the little kids, little Black kids who are influencers with toys. You know, they get on YouTube and play my stepson used to watch other kids
Mhm.
play with toys on YouTube.
Right.
And so just thinking about when these things are created, who are they created for? You know, are you creating an Addie for the Black girls who like American Girl dolls? Are you creating it for the white people and the Black people who are critiquing you for not having any dolls of color, right? And now we see how American Girl has exploded and it's very diverse, but was that for us, right? Or was that, you know, especially thinking about who Addie was, her story, her books, you know, all of that. I found it to be very degrading, right? But my girlfriends who had other American Girl dolls assumed that that would be the doll that I would want. And my mother even was like, if you want one, we'll get you this one.
Right.
And when I said, that's not the one I want, I haven't circled any of her stuff. She doesn't have any fancy clothes or any of that. It was, well, why don't you want that, right? So my question really is, where do you see that line between like, creating these things for that are Black, you know, and who is creating them and what the actual purpose is?
Yeah. That is a multi-layered, multifaceted question, right? Because I think to the question earlier, the question was about, you know, who are the products actually for, right? And to what end, right? For what purpose? So the American Girl dolls were brought up. We're talking about Addie. And you know how some people, even Black people, were like, "We're not buying you a slave doll. Sorry," right? Yes,
I could learn Addie.
yes. No, you're good. No, you're okay. And there's a newer one now. I don't remember her name. Melanie. Yes, the new one is Melanie, and she's supposed to be like a civil rights activist or something in 19. Yeah, she has like a whole like storyline about the. Yeah. So the new, the new, her name is Melanie. I'm remembering this right. She's like her whole backstory is like the 1955 Montgomery boycott.
Oh, wow.
Like that's her whole like backstory. Okay, that's Addie's doll. I mean,
That's the same disappointment. Like,
so nobody wants a slave doll, apparently, y'all. Well, I think okay. So I will say, yeah. So I'm sure. So with the Melanie doll, for example, was a Black woman who was commissioned by American Girl, which I should say is owned by Mattel. So Barbie and Mattel. So there are people who want to make, oh, well, I'm only buying you Barbie because you know Mattel. They the same people. So since 1995, let me be clear, they the same. But so there's a Black woman who was commissioned to do the backstory, the books, all of this stuff to get it period specific, right? For this 1955 specific American Girl doll named Melanie, who's Black also. And I would say she, as a Black, this is part of why I write about both the producers, but also what the reception might be in the book, because I'm sure the producer, the Black woman who they commission, is like, I'm doing this for us. Like, we need our history documented as much as we need Samantha and whoever else, right? Our stuff needs to be in there too. But I also think that there are ways that white supremacy and racism would say that the only narratives that are important about Black people are the ones that are about struggle, but also the ones that specifically discuss in relationship to white people, right? As if Black people don't exist unless we're in conversation and connection to white people, right? And so I would say that that we have to think about not only the particular context of the creation of the doll, but the industry in which it was created. The industry is predominantly white. Mattel basically owns 80% of all children's toys, right? And so if you're buying something and you're like, okay, I'm opting out, where?
Right.
How? It doesn't exist, right? And so I think that like I said, they did what they were supposed to do, right? They're like, oh, you don't know, you need to go find a Black person because we know. They went to go find a Black person. They probably paid her very well. And she probably is continuing to get money based on every single doll, every single book, every single piece that is sold, right? Get your money, girl, right? at the same time, right? How are we reinforcing the idea that there is no other narrative about Black people other than slavery and the civil rights movement? That's it, right? Because in schools, when we go to school, Black people show up, right, in those two places. So we can't then be surprised that on the market, that's the only where they're gonna show up too. And I would say, Brianna, you started this conversation talking about, you know, being able to buy Black Panther merch for your son and all of this. In the same way I talk about this with Princess Tiana, that like I was interested not necessarily in having the doll, but in whether or not people like you. I walk down like toy aisles all the time. I'm not like I don't have no kids. I'm just walking down just to see what's there. Like what's the narrative that they're creating about what girls want and what boys want in the toy aisles. You cannot buy a Princess Tiana doll by herself. Does not exist. Period. Right now, the only way that you can buy a Princess Tiana doll and have it is if it's in the Target sells like a 10-piece doll set, right? And she for Christmas, and she's in the doll set. She ain't no accessories, ain't no frogs, ain't no right. The fact that she's a frog. Right.
Yeah,
wait a second.
Yeah.
But they consulted with Black women about that story.
You can buy her. So I have a bunch of those. So I buy all the Black dolls that I see when I see them. Because I had Barbies and they were white and I had to press their hair. Because we press our hair.
Right.
That didn't work out too good. They were all white and their hair was like asymmetrical, but it was burnt asymmetrical. So that's another story. So then when I got older, because I'm 50, so there weren't a lot of Black Barbie dolls.
Yeah.
So I just start buying, even right now, we live in Florida. So whenever we go to Disney, I buy the little Black Tiana dolls. I buy all the dolls of color. Because I know that there's going to come a time when these kids won't see them, won't have them. Because you said something tonight, Aria, just showing up. It's already different. When we walk into rooms, it's already different.
Yeah.
And so the commodification of us and the things that are important to us is going to shift, but it will be different when we can tell that story.
Right.
So the reason I buy them is precisely why you wrote your book.
Yeah.
That story wasn't told. And I know because I'm married to a white man, my brother's married to a white woman. They got little mixed kids running around here. Those kids ain't gonna see no dolls that look like this. And they're not buying them because kids aren't into Barbies like that. Like they're just not into it like that. And ain't nobody, I used to do reenactments of enslaved people, but I ain't buying no slave dolls.
Right.
I'm trash, but I draw the line. There's an ethics against.
Right.
Dog, and when you mentioned Tiana, so my husband goes place and he's like, oh, I saw this Tiana doll. Whenever I see him, I get them because you can't find them.
Right.
So the little miniature ones, you can go into the dollar store, into the toy store, and get them. Moana, I'm getting anything brown.
Yeah.
Anything brown, we can get down.
Right.
Then get back because I'm getting it. That's what I do now. So I got my niece, the Misty Copeland. Mattel doll. I'm getting those dolls, the commemorative ones, because you will not see them.
No.
You'll only be able to buy them on Etsy, on eBay at a crazy, crazy price.
Right.
And so I'm a preservationist, historic preservationist. And so all these things that don't exist today, the Green Book, you know, these things that you see them, they were everywhere.
And
now you don't see them. So that's one of the reasons why I buy them now, just to have them. So maybe I got you.
I got you.
But
I got you.
Just showing up is already different.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah.
You need to put that on the hashtag.
See, and then I'm gonna put my little black face here. I'm gonna buy my shirt, right? Okay.
I have to buy it first.
Well,
I have to buy it from Target.
yeah, you want to buy from Target or you can buy from me directly.
Right.
I mean, this is the other thing that's happening in the market now too. There's a Black woman artist. I saw her work at Home Goods because I was just randomly at Home Goods. You could buy it directly from her or you could buy it from Home Goods, but you wouldn't know that if you didn't go find her yourself, right? And so there are these really interesting ways that I think social media and other things have changed the way that we consume and how you might interact with these things. But again, I mean, I have a Princess Tiana Christmas ornament, and there were 3 of them and one of them was broke. So right, like how are you gonna buy, when are you gonna buy? Like the fact that you can only get Princess Tiana during Christmas says a lot, versus, you know, both Frozen, you can buy them girls anytime and all the time. And there's 2 of them anyway. Sorry, we're distracted over here in our thinking about consumption. But I think, you know, ultimately, you know, my question for myself, but for all of us, right, is like, how do we navigate this on a daily basis? How are we then also using these products to teach our children, to teach their friends, to teach other people about how we live in the world, right? How we exist in the world. And that's really what the book is doing, what I'm trying to do. So yeah, I think we got time. We wrapping up. What we doing? It's one more. We got one more. Okay.
Yeah, I was gonna say, oh, I can stop you later. But I'm really curious to just get your perspective on the ways that, so I work for a 100% online university, right? So, and I work in research, but I have like a traditional academic background. But this is a space that I'm really fascinated by, bot technology and AI, and the way that culture is being coded.
Yep.
To give us intelligence to create automation and spaces to like drive industries that were so human focused, like education.
Yeah.
Right. Education is not human focused anymore. It's systems and tools focused.
Yeah.
So I'm really curious about your thoughts about this. I think even as we talk about influencers, like when I think about influencers on social media, first I'm older, so like that didn't make no sense to me either. So like, but I did see free labor. I see cheaper labor, significantly cheaper labor.
Yes.
Labor that will give you, you know, dividends with no benefits, no investment prospects.
Yeah.
Nothing like that. Not sustainable labor, not sustainable wealth, quick and easy wealth. I mean, you can do with it what you want to do. But for a company, if I don't have to hire a marketing team and I can let you play and pay you maybe even coins in comparison to what I pay somebody that was on my staff, and then they're not the same level of liability to me.
Yeah.
I just see a labor market shifting.
Absolutely.
I'm not an economist, by the way, but anyway. But I'm really curious about the way technology is intersecting our conceptions about culture.
Yeah.
And how culture is being literally like commodified into dots.
Even
like,
segments.
that
Yeah.
technology, right? Like
Yeah.
into numbers.
Yeah.
And digitized so
Yeah.
that we can automate for the sake of creating this world that we keep consuming.
Yeah. So sorry, the question, yeah, I hope y'all heard because I'm tired of repeating. But okay. I'm like, look, y'all about to get me. So I think so the question was about like social media and basically the datatization of what we consume. And I will say that this is not me. This is another really brilliant Black woman scholar, Safia Noble. She has a book called Algorithms of Oppression.
Algorithmic justice league.
Same vibe. And her book, and I only know about Safia's work because, you know, she writes about how in the early 2000s, if you search for Black girl in Google, you would get only porn. Right. You would only get porn. Right. If you look for it, or you did an image search. And I have to say, like, me and my students do this activity, you know, during the year too. And we're like, okay, look up professor. What does a professor look like? You will never see somebody who looks like me. And we out here. Right. If you look up hair, you will never see, right. You'll never see, you know, braids. You'll never see Bantu knots. You'll never see any, right. So there's a lot of ways that that Google in particular is creating data about culture that reinforces, you know, white supremacist and patriarchal ideas about culture. Because those people who are actively coding, this is the other thing about data too, right? There are people who are creating the data. There are people who are inputting the systems of the data, right? And most of those people are white dudes, right? Most of those people are white dudes. No. Both those people are white dudes, and they themselves have really messed up relationships to anybody who is not them and anybody who does not do tech in the ways that they do. And so I would say, you know, generally that yes, like algorithms in general are doing us a disservice, right? I think in the same ways that I was talking about representation, algorithms work the same way, right? It's trying to distill all this information down into a little tight package to say, this is what to buy, this is how to get it, this is how to do it. And so, you know, I think that we have to actively resist, right? I have a friend who actively likes and dislikes things on social media all the time. So the algorithm never really knows who they are, right? But I'm like, my algorithm know me, child. They know I like nails. They know I need glasses. They know, right? Like, right. We sitting here having this conversation. I'm probably about to have Barbie ads for the rest of the night, you know?
In that space, there's natural language processing.
Right.
So you can like all you want, but
right.
say one sentence.
Right.
And we trying to figure out who you are.
Right. Well, exactly. And so I think that like, so there are people, this is not my vein at all, right? But there are definitely people who are working on the AI side of things who are like, well, how do we make AI attentive to the ways that Black people or people of color or women or whatever it is experience the world? Right? Because right now we have a really small set of people who are making decisions about what culture looks like in a data sense, right? How do we change that narrative? And so there, like I said, there's Safiya Noble, there's, you know, my homegirl, Ashley Green Wade. There's a lot of people who are in those spaces doing those things. It's not mine. So I'm like, look, when I'm on Twitter, I'm just trying to be on Twitter. But I think there are a lot of ways that they intersect around representation and how we ourselves feed and understand our relationship to the things that we consume, especially because Google is only, if you only on Google on the first page, you getting what they think, right, is what you want, not necessarily what you ask for. Yeah.
What was the second name? You said Safiya Wade and who's the other one?
Safiya Noble and Ashley Green Wade.
Oh.
Yeah. Bet. I think we did.
I got a question. I don't know if I can wait.
Okay. Yeah, I guess so. And we gonna wrap up after this question though. Look, Lanks is like, can I have my house back? We like, okay.
This is a great conversation. And my brain thinks different. So, you know, I'm just thinking about the legacy that we're going to be leaving for the next generation of young women right now. And, you know, thinking back to my grandmother and great grandmother, and they had a whole different belief of saving and what they spent their money on and consumed, and just having messages early on connected to shaping my identity of respecting your elders and, you know, work twice as hard, keep your head down, and, you know, keep quiet and just work hard. But like for this next group of young women that are coming up that look like me and you, what are these messages that are they taking from us today? And are these messages better? Is it worse? Is it the same, or is it something else? I'm just thinking.
So the question was about whether or not the messages that young folk are getting from us now, right, are better or worse or different than the messages that our grandmothers, our parents, you know, gave to us. And I would say part of the thing that I found most interesting about writing this book is that a lot of it's the same. Right? The package is a little different, right? But about, you know, what your allegiances should be to as a Black person, I think are the same. Right? What your commitment should be as a Black woman, I think are the same. There's a little bit of nuance. I think we're having more stories about how people might navigate those relationships differently. Like, you know, we know now that, you know, just having a Black man ain't good enough. Right? Or just being in a relationship ain't good enough, right? To do your life and then just be married is not good enough, right? We deserve to be taken care of. We deserve to be loved. We deserve rest, right? Those are things that our grandmothers didn't have space to occupy, right? And so I think we are channeling different narratives. I have a sister who's 7 years younger than me, and I have an older sister. The older one's here. She's 5 years older, right? And I think we talk a lot about the fact that the older one has very different we got different narratives as the oldest kids versus my younger sister, who I would say knows how to rest, knows how to get right. Like she knows how to rest in ways that we still trying to figure out. Right. And so I think there are a lot of things that they are getting that are better. Right. In the sense that like we are talking about care. We're talking about mental capacity, not even like health and wellness, because I don't even know if I believe in that, because you can always be unwell. But I think we're talking about, rape and sexual assault. We're talking about, mental health. We're talking about therapy, right? Like those conversations are completely different than what we got. And I think therefore better in ways that like, I don't know. I talk about this in my work too. Growing up, the conversations about sex that I got was like, okay, you got your period, keep your legs closed. Mm-hmm. That don't even help me once I get married. Right? Like that, for real though. And I think now we are able to navigate those conversations differently, and I hope better, right? With young people coming up in ways that like we all were harmed by not having those conversations as kids. But I will say also, there are some narratives that we have about consumption, about hustle, about capitalism saving us, about representation. Just because they Black, they gonna help us. Like those things have gotten really sticky. And I don't think that we've gotten loose from them in the same way that we got loose from other things, which is why the book exists, right? Then I'm like, okay, capitalism, if we got to live in it, let's figure out what we're really doing, right? In ways that I think, we're still trying to figure that out. I think, Black people's relationship to capitalism, it will forever be fraught because capitalism exists because of us. We were the capital. Right? On both sides of the globe, right? Not just in the US. And so I think that will always be a fraught space. We're always going to be trying to navigate that and figure that out. Does that mean separatism? Does that mean doing a little bit? Does that mean going all in and taking over? Does that mean doing their job better than them? Right? We're always going to be in those spaces because that's what it is. But I think there are some other ways about how we take care of us, how we take care of our families, how we take care of our communities and our spaces that we've gotten a lot better about. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay.
So I want to thank all of you for joining us, Dr. Halliday, Dr. Barner, the audience who are with us live in my living room, the audience that is here on the Zoom. I'm going to ask y'all to stay just a little while longer because what I want to do is I want to share with you all what we have coming up next for Entrepreneurial Appetite. I promise you I won't take a long time. Also, I got to give a shout out to one person in the audience on the Zoom, Dr. Bumpus. Dr. Eileen Bumpus is, Brianna, I don't know if you ever met Dr. Bumpus, but she worked at UT while you were there. And Dr. Bumpus paid for my dissertation to be edited. So those of you who some of y'all hit, I know y'all know what it's like when you write this. The last thing you want to think about is like sometimes you're there, and there's ain't right on a dissertation because you got all these other things to think about. And so that support that I got from Dr. Bumpus was like crucial at like one of the most stressful times in my life. So I got to give a shout out to Dr. Bumpus. So give me 1 second. I'm gonna share my screen. And so in the spirit of Afrotech, so I don't know if y'all know this, Afrotech is like the biggest gathering of Black people in tech that exists probably in the world. And it's actually going on right now in Austin, Texas. And so in January, we're going to be having a conversation about Bitcoin, about cryptocurrency with a woman by the name of, Cleve Masidor. And she's like, listen, we don't always know this, but Black people are in like cryptocurrency, blockchain technology in ways that you may not see in the mainstream media. We may think that like as a community or communities of people that we're distant from that, but like we're everywhere and we are in this space as well. And so in January in San Antonio, there's an event called Dream Week, and it happens the first 3 weeks of the month to celebrate Martin Luther King. And so this is the first of 3 different events that we're going to be having around Dream Week that deal with Black folk and blockchain technology, cryptocurrency, and also we're going to have a very special lunch gathering for the men with an angel investor who lives in Austin, Texas. And so There'll be more about that coming up. So those of you who are here in person, those of you who joined in the Zoom, I'll be sending out information about what we have coming up next, probably in the next few days or so. I'm still working on getting a speaker for December. And so I just want to make sure that that person gives me their official confirmation before I start talking about it. But I'll send you all that information as well. If you want to join these conversations more regularly, if you want to be a part of joining us for some of our live events, some of the people who are here with us in person are actually patrons of Entrepreneurial Appetite. And so monthly they give $5 to get access to our live conversations on Zoom. And they also get early access to the podcast. So all of these conversations that we have here at Entrepreneurial Appetite go to the Entrepreneurial Appetite podcast to get early access to the videos and the audio recordings. So the idea behind the Founding 55 is that I want to take the resources for that and to be able to hire a Black intern or a freelancer to actually help do this work. And so I really want to hire an intern because, as you all know, Black men and women in college don't really get the same opportunities for paid internships as other folks. So I really hope to have someone train them on how to do the production of the podcast and the video moving forward. So again, you can use the QR code to join the Patreon. If not, I'll keep you on the email list and you can make your donations and join us every month. So thank you all for joining us. Thank you again, Dr. Barner. Thank you again, Dr. Halliday. And thank you all for supporting and joining us tonight for Entrepreneurial Appetite.